Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Deuteronomy chapter 21. Moses has been restating a lot of the laws that were found in the Torah already, and here he begins to shift from talking about laws around warfare to laws about familial and domestic life. He says that all of these relationships should be based around grace, even for the outcasts, but people should also not bend the rules and allow sin to happen because of favoritism. It all culminates with a command that explicitly reminds us about the gospel, what Jesus did for us, how he bore one of the worst punishments for us to be released from our curse. And if that's true, then out of gratitude, we ought to live out these twin truths of grace and justice in our family lives too. And if you would like to join our community of followers of Jesus trying to read the Bible and understand it better, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment or a question about this passage of Scripture. If a slain person is found lying in the open country, in the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess, and it is not known who has struck him, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance to the cities which are around the slain one. It shall be that the city which is nearest to the slain man, that is, the elders of that city, shall take a heifer of the herd which has not been worked, and which has not pulled in a yoke, and the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which has not been plowed or sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to serve him and to bless in the name of the Lord. And every dispute and every assault shall be settled by them. All the elders of that city which is nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. And they shall answer and say, Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it. Forgive your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, O Lord. And do not place the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel. And the blood guiltiness shall be forgiven them. So you shall remove the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, when you do what is right in the eyes of the Lord. So this law, this ritual, is how the Israelites will atone for unsolved murders. Back in Deuteronomy 19, we heard how murderers were to receive the death penalty to atone for the death that they themselves caused. And even in the same chapter, we heard about the cities of refuge, those places of asylum where people who had killed accidentally could flee to. It was a grace to them, of course, but it was still an exile. There were still rules and regulations that had to be followed in order to atone for the death that had been committed. And so here we get a similar ritual for murders where someone has clearly been killed, but nobody knows who did it or even what city that person was from. A heifer will need to be sacrificed by the elders and Levites of whatever community is closest to the body. Even though none of those people individually actually committed that murder, the entire community is still taking responsibility for it and asking God to forgive them and purify their land. The entire community taking responsibility like this led to deeper community relationships. And if we want to have similar relationships, then we need to take similar responsibility and similar accountability in our communities, our churches and ministries. I'm not saying we should hold an entire group of people responsible for murder, but we need to have that sense of responsibility whenever something does go wrong in one of our communities. When you go out to battle against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take them away captive, and see among the captives a beautiful woman, and have a desire for her, and would take her as a wife for yourself, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She shall also remove the clothes of her captivity, and shall remain in your house, and mourn her father and mother for a full month. And after that you may go into her, and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. It shall be, if you are not pleased with her, then you shall let her go wherever she wishes. But you shall certainly not sell her for money. You shall not mistreat her, because you have humbled her. So this is another example of those commands and laws that make us feel uncomfortable. And it's really because they're just so foreign to us in our Western society, which we should be extremely fortunate for, that we're not this used to slavery. But unfortunately, this was a really big part of ancient warfare, capturing prisoners and taking the women as sex slaves. But notice, according to God's covenant, in His standard, these women are not called slaves, they're called wives. They're to be treated with dignity, even though they're in the lowest social class according to every other nearby culture. They're given rights. They're able to change their clothes of mourning, and they're given time to grieve their mother and father. It's even forbidden for them to be sold as property. Now, of course, this relationship is still much less than ideal, but in a world where war and death and slavery is very much real, in a world where these women didn't have the same opportunity as women today to make it on their own, God has grace even on these women, and He instructs His people to give them the dignity that is due them as a fellow image bearer. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then it shall be in the day that he wills what he has to his sons, he cannot make the son of the loved the firstborn before the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the beginning of his strength. To him belongs the right of the firstborn. And so this is where we begin to see that shift of laws about warfare and legal proceedings into family life. And that last law serves as a pretty nice segue between the two. Now, once again, the assumed practice of the time was that polygamy was on the table. And also assumed, but separate from that, was the idea that firstborn sons would receive the largest cut of a person's inheritance. Now, with all of those presuppositions out of the way, God instructs for His people to not play favorites with their children when divvying up inheritances, that the real firstborn son should get the cut of the real firstborn son. Now, the reason given for the favoritism here in this example is that maybe you have two sons by different mothers, and you love one more than the other, or one is more beautiful than the other. You weren't supposed to give the double portion to the son of the woman you loved if it meant you were skipping over your real firstborn son. Now, this should immediately be raising bells in our minds of Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and their whole episode of the Jerry Springer Show from Genesis 29 to 30. But interestingly, exactly what Moses says not to do is exactly what Jacob does later on in Genesis 48. Joseph famously received a double portion of his father's inheritance through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, even though he was not first in line. He was the firstborn of Rachel, who Jacob loved more than his first wife Leah, but really that should have gone to Reuben. And so what this shows us a picture of is that Israel, both the person and the nation, since day one they have been disobedient to God's covenant. They have not lived up to His standard. And it shows all of us how hard it is to actually live these truths out in everyday life. If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of his city will stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it and fear. We remember that honoring your father and mother were big commandments found in Exodus 20 and in Leviticus 19. And we mentioned how that command was put in place, in theory, to keep every generation of Israelites faithful to God's covenant, provided, of course, that the parents of any particular generation were also obeying God's covenant. But here, Moses says that rebellious children that will just not honor their mother and father should be put to death. Of course, it should go without saying that the implication here is for adult children. This is not a justification for child abuse, and definitely not child sacrifice. Young children can be stubborn and rebellious, but they can't exactly be drunkards and gluttons. Now, again, this is an incredibly harsh and tragic sentence. It should be the last resort, right? But the idea is that if you are this insistent on limiting sin in your community, that you would even put your own children to death because they were rebellious, it would mean that future generations would be protected, that the lineage of faithful followers to God would be preserved. The nation cannot afford to jeopardize their future by leaving it in the hands of these that disobey God. And just like in Deuteronomy 13, 17, and 19, we see that it's done to purge the evil from the land. Taking action against sin in regard like this is going to cause short-term suffering, but it causes the community, the nation, in the long term to continue following God. If a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day. For he who is hanged is accursed of God, so that you do not defile your land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. And finally, we see a command that actually shows grace to the worst of the worst sinners. Typically, as we saw in the last verses and elsewhere, capital punishment was carried out via stoning, not hanging. And that was done intentionally, so that the whole community could feel the weight of responsibility for this terrible crime that had occurred. But that led to other forms of capital punishment and death being viewed as especially accursed, like hanging. Perhaps that's because of how trees have been associated with God's life throughout the Bible. Now, even though this punishment was only reserved for the worst of the worst, God still graciously extends that these people receive a proper burial. They should be treated with dignity even in their death. And of course, it's a forerunning to Jesus' story. He himself was hanged on a cross, only to be taken down and buried that day. And eventually, Paul will use this verse in Galatians 3 to point out how Jesus took our place as cursed by dying specifically on a cross. And so ultimately, we see that it all points to Jesus. I mean, that's clear from these last verses. But it's also clear in the holiness demanded of the Israelites and their communities and families. It's clear in the grace that they're supposed to show even to social outcasts. Whether it's atoning for unsolved murders, treating foreign wives with dignity, or providing reliable inheritances to your children, the heart of Christ is evident, even in these laws and commands that seem so foreign on the surface. And we, as Christ followers today, should take the wisdom from these laws and apply them to our own lives. We should also be treating all people with dignity, all while refusing to show favoritism and refusing to allow sin and evil in our lives. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.